In this video, we will build and deploy a full-stack Django application using Aiven and Heroku. Let's go. All right, guys, this is an intermediate level tutorial. It's best to have some familiarity with Python and shell scripting in order to follow along. We will be building a Django application. Django is a high-level Python web framework, and we will be deploying that to Heroku. Heroku is a platform as a service. It's perfect for hosting web applications, prototyping, just developing apps quickly. The backend of this application is a MySQL database hosted on Aiven. I have a video on how to build that database and deploy it to Aiven. I will link that video in the description below, so you're welcome to watch that if you like. So the first thing we need is a Heroku account. So we can sign up for a Heroku account at Heroku.com. Once we sign up and log in, there's a drop-down menu here on the right with a link to the dashboard. If you click on that, that'll show all of the applications that are in the account. So when we create our application, it'll appear here. The next thing that we need is a Heroku CLI. A CLI is a command line interface. It's a tool that allows us to interact, communicate back and forth with Heroku through a terminal. So I'll put this link in the description below as well. Once you're here, you can click on install the Heroku CLI, and that'll bring up the links for the installers. So once you download and install the CLI, we can open a terminal and we can run Heroku version, and we should see the version of the CLI that's installed. And then we can run Heroku login to log into Heroku through the terminal. So it'll bring up this page here. We just click login, and then we'll see a success message. And then if we go back to the terminal, we can see we're logged in under that account. And we can double check this with Heroku Who Am I? And that will show us the account that we're signed in with. Then Aiven. Aiven is a cloud database service. I already have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. This will open the dashboard, which will show all of the instances that we have running on Aiven. I only have one instance of MySQL running, which we'll see here in a second. There it is. So we can click on that, and this will show us all of our connection details. So these are all the details that we'll use to connect our application to Aiven. We can see the databases on the left-hand side. We click on databases. That will show us the databases. We'll be using this one. It's housing data from Zillow. It's median home prices month by month from 2000 to 2024 for every city in the United States. So that's the data set that we'll be working with for this project. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and open VS Code. I already have a directory created, and let's go ahead and open an integrated terminal and git bash. Let's check our Python installation, Python version, and first thing is create a virtual environment. So we do that with Python M for module, V, and V for virtual environment. I'm just calling it virtual environment. Once this is created, we'll go ahead and activate this virtual environment with source, V, scripts, and then activate. All right. Now that that's activated, we can check our package manager with pip list, and we can see the only thing that's in there is the package manager itself. So let's go ahead and install Django. With pip install Django, and this will install Django and a couple of other packages. And I'm thinking ahead. That's something I'm thinking of, some of the commands that we need to use. Okay, so this will install all those packages. We can check once they're installed in our pip list again and make sure everything's installed in there. Pip list, and we can see now Django is in there. We can see all those packages in there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and call on Django to create a project for us. So we'll say Django admin start project, and we'll just give this a name. I'm just going to call it project, and then dot to create the project in our current directory. So this will create this folder, this project folder with a bunch of files in it, and then this manage.py file. Now we need to create an app, and we'll do that by calling on this manage.py file and saying start app, and then give it a name. I'm just going to call it app. And that will create this app folder with a bunch of files in it, and then this folder in there. Now we need a directory to hold our templates. So we'll cd into app and make directory, call it templates, and then cd into templates and create our template. For this application, I will just be using one template for the home page. All it will be is a table that displays the first 20 rows in the database. That's all it's going to do. So I'm just going to call this data table. Okay, data table.html. Okay, so we'll go back in a few minutes here and write this template. But for now, I want to open the settings file and start to configure this project. So if we open the settings file, we can see there's already quite a bit in here. First thing I want to do is set up our static directory. So when we deploy to Heroku, Heroku will run a command called collect static. So it collects all of the static files in this project. So all the CSS, JavaScript, images, whatever it may be. So we need to tell it where to stash that. So to do that, we needed to interact with the operating system. So we need to import OS, okay, which is a module to interact with the operating system. And we're going to set up static URL, static root, and we'll say os.path.join, and we're going to join the base directory with a directory. I'm just going to call it static files. All right. Static files. Okay, next we need to automate some of the configurations between Django and Heroku. And to do that, we'll use a package appropriately named Django Heroku. So let's go ahead and install that. Pip install Django Heroku. And we need to import Django Heroku. So we'll say import Django Heroku. And then we can use Django Heroku down here. I'll just put it here. I'll say Django Heroku.settings, and we're going to pass in locals, which will pass in all of the local variables from this scope, which is the settings file. All right. Next, let's tell this project where to find our templates. In templates here, dirs, we'll say from base directory, go to app, and then go to templates, right? Because that's the directory where it can find all of those templates. Okay, next let's add the app to this list of installed apps. And remember, our app is just called app, so just put that in there. And finally, we need to configure the database. So with configuring the database, we need a couple of things. First, we need to change the engine here. As you can see, it's SQLite 3. So we need to change this to MySQL. To do that, we need a Python adapter. It's called MySQL client. So we'll pip install MySQL client. And we don't need to import anything. We can just change this to MySQL. And then we need to give the project all of the database connection details. And so to do that, we are going to separate those concerns. So we're going to put all of the details actually in another file called a .env file. So we're going to cd back into the root of the project and create a .env file, .env, and we're going to put all of the details from Aiven in here. So if we go back to Aiven, all of these connection details we'll put in that .env file, and I already have them in a note here, so we don't have to suffer with me copying and pasting each one. And so now that we have all of these details here, we can go ahead and start adding them into our defaults. So the first thing we'll do is get rid of this. And what we'll do is, did we import? No, we haven't imported. So remember, one thing that we need to do is import a package that allows us to precisely decouple our configurations. So that is Python decouple. So let's go ahead and pip install Python decouple. All right, and then we can say from decouple import config. And we're going to use this config to pass in these variables. So we'll say for the name, we'll say config, and we can pass in now the variable name up here for name, for the database name. Okay, I'm just going to copy this down, and now I'm going to copy paste each one. User will be db user, and then password, and so on and so forth. Password, host, and then port. And after this, we should be done for this file. And we can move on to start to interact with the database. Okay, so let's just double check our work, make sure everything looks good here. We have all our imports, not missing anything. Let's see, just checking for typos and whatnot. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, I think we're good for this file. Now we can start to interact with the database. We've set up the connection here. So what we need to do is create a model. A model is a Python class that acts as a blueprint for the database so that the application can interact with it. So from the root here, we'll say Python :manage.py and say inspect DB. So we're going to inspect the database and print the output. So angle bracket, and then print it to models.py. All right. And this may take a second to create, especially today. My system's been slow. So this is reading the one table that we have in our database and creating a model from it. And so we should see that here in just a second. There it is. Okay, so it's called housing data, and it has all the field names and the data types and all the rest of the details. So this is pretty cool. So now what we can do is interact with the database through this model. So let's go ahead and move this file to app, and then we'll just replace. And now let's create our view. A view is a Python function that handles HTTP requests. So when we make a request, an HTTP request to the application, with a browser, we'll call on that view to render the template. Okay, so this is what that looks like. So let's get rid of this. And then we'll say, first we need to import the model, right? So we'll say from.models import, and it's called housing data. And now let's define our function. I'm just going to call it data table. And this is going to take in a request. And the first thing that I want are all of the values, right? So we'll say housing data.objects.all, and this will give us all of those values. And I'm going to limit this to 20. The table has like 900 records. I don't need all of that. And then we're going to set this equal to values. Okay. Next thing is fields. We need all of the fields from the table. So to get that, we'll say housing.data._meta.getFields. Okay. Fields. All right. And now what we need to do is we need to loop over these fields and extract the field name. And the probably cleanest way to do that is with a list comprehension. So list comprehension is like a for loop, but it's written very succinctly. So the way it looks like is we'll say for field in all of that. And at the beginning of the statement, we'll write what we want, which is field.name. And then we'll put all of this in between square brackets and set all of that equal to fields. All right. And now we can return, we're going to render the request and then the template against data table.html and a dictionary with fields and values. So we'll say fields, and then values. Okay. So this will render the HTML template along with the fields and values so the template has access to all of that, right? And it can render it. Okay, cool. Next, let's take a look at our URL. So let's create a URL. The URL is going to determine that when we hit the root of the application, we'll render this view. We'll call on the view to render the template. All right, so we'll say from app import views, and then here we can now create our path. We'll say path to the root, which is just an empty space in between single quotations. We'll say give us views.datatable. Okay, so that does it for the URLs. Okay, back to views. So again, this is rendering that HTML template. So let's go ahead and write that template now. So this is our front end. So let's start with emit abbreviation, some HTML, and I'm just going to call this housing data table. And let's create a table with a table head and then a row in there. And then in this row, what we're going to do is loop over fields. And again, the template has access to fields and values, yeah. So we can say with this syntax, curly braces, double %, we'll say for field in fields. And then we'll close this for loop with, again, curly braces, double %, end for. Just like that. And then for each one of these, we're going to create a th tag and then pass in the value in between double curly braces like this. So we'll say field. That'll pass in that field there. Now let's create a table body. And here we're going to loop over the values. We want the values here. So same thing. We'll say for value in values, and then n4. I'm just going to copy this. And then we're going to create a table row here. And then inside the row, we're going to loop over the fields because we need the fields as a key to tell the template which value to acquire. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and this. And then here we're going to say TD, our table data, cell, double curly braces, and then we'll pass in value, pipe, and then we have to pause here. So what happens is that Django's templating does not allow for directly accessing object attributes. So what we need in order to do that is a custom filter, a template filter. Okay, so we're going to build that. Let's go ahead and cd into app and create a directory for our custom filter called template tags. So we'll say make directory template tags. cd into template tags. And we're going to create a couple of files in here. One is an init.py file. This is not strictly necessary for this example, but it's good practice to have it in there so the directory is treated like a package. And then we're going to create our custom filter. Filter.py. Okay. And then let's go ahead and open this custom filter. And the first thing we need to do is import template from Django. So we'll say from Django import template. And then we need to create a register so that when we create the filter, we can add it to the library of templates. So we'll say register equal to template.library. And now we can write our filter. I'm going to call this get field. Remember, we're trying to get that field, right? This is going to take in an object and a field name. And all this is going to do is first check if there's an attribute. So we'll say if has attribute, pass in the object and the field name, then return, and this is just going to return the object and field name with get attribute. So pass an object and field name there, otherwise return an empty string. Okay. And now finally we'll register this with a decorator. We'll say at register dot filter. So that registers that as a filter. Excuse me. Okay. Now we can use this filter in our template. So first thing we need to do here is load the custom filter. So right above table, I'm going to say load custom filter. You can actually put this all the way to the top of the file. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to put it right there. And now we can come back here and use that get field filter, and we'll pass in field, right? Okay. All right, so everything looks good. Checking for typos, fine. Now finally, let's just add some style here, nothing too crazy. So I'll target the table, say width 100%. And then let's collapse the border so we don't have any space in between our cells. So we'll say border, collapse. And then we'll target the TDTH. We'll give it a little bit of padding. Say padding 8 pixels. And give it a border. We'll say 1 pixel. Solid, give it this gray color. And let's align the text, say text align left. And then the table head, I want kind of like a darker background, so I'll say background color and just give it this F4 gray color. All right. Okay, so all that looks fine. So at this stage, our application should run locally. Okay. So let's go ahead and give it a test. Let's say Python manage.py run server, and that will run the application. And let's take a look here, see. This is going to take a second. Okay, so it's running at this URL. Let's follow the link. And there it is. Okay, so this is what we're expecting to see when we deploy, right? So, okay, great. Application's running, nice. Now let's go ahead, let's start gearing up for deployment. Okay, first thing we're going to need is a git ignore file. So we're using git to deploy, right? So we need to ignore some stuff. Let's say touch.gitignore. And I'm just going to add the PyCache and our virtual environment and then our .env file, right? We want to push that stuff up. All right, so next we need something called a proc file. A proc file is a text file that is going to tell Heroku how to handle this application. And so we want to handle this as a web process, so we'll just say web. And then we are going to use a package called gunicorn. Gunicorn is a web server gateway interface. It's basically a package that allows the server to interface with the application, whether it's Nginx or Apache or whatever server, so that it can communicate with the application. So we'll say gunicorn, and here we'll say, we'll install that package. We'll say pip install gunicorn. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll call on our project. We'll say project, and that should be your project name. And then here is WSGI Web Server Gateway Interface :application, and then flag log file. So it logs an output. Okay. All right. That's it for this file. Now what we need is a runtime file to tell Heroku what runtime to use. So we'll touch runtime.txt, and then here I'm just going to tell it Python, and I'm just going to use 3.10.12 works. Okay. All right. Next, we need a requirements file, which will tell Heroku what our requirements are. So all of the packages in our package managers. So the easiest way to do that is to freeze the package manager list into a file called requirements.txt. So we'll say pip freeze, angle brackets requirements.text, and that gives us a list of all of our requirements. Okay. And I think that's it. I think that's everything we need for deployment. So, excuse me. Okay, so now that we're ready, let's go ahead and initialize our Git repository. We'll say git init, and now let's create a Heroku app. So just say Heroku create, give it a name. It has to be unique to your repository and unique to Heroku. So some names are taken. I'm just gonna say Django app 100. That should be available. So give this a second here. And once this is done, we'll go back to the dashboard and we should see our application created there. So there it is. Let's check our dashboard. So we go back here, and if we refresh, we should see that application there. And there it is, right? Django app 100. Okay. And what happens also when we run this create in a Git repository, it automatically creates it as a remote of this Heroku repository here. So if we say git remote version, we can see that listed there, all right? Okay. All right, now what we need to do is give Heroku all of the connection details for our database. So configure it that way. So everything in our .env file, we need to give it these credentials. So what we're gonna say is Heroku config and then set, and I already have them again in this string here. So I'm just gonna copy this so I don't have to do each one of these individually. Okay, and then at the end we'll say app, and then give it the app name. So Django app 100. And this will set all of these configurations, and we can check it after the fact. So we can say Heroku config, let's say app, and then the app name, Django app 100, and we can see the configurations that are set for that application, so we know that we did this right. Okay, so all that's in there. Okay, now what's left? Now we can go ahead, add, commit, and push, all right? So let's go ahead and try that. Git add, git commit. Hopefully all of this works. I'm just gonna say first commit, and then git push, and we'll say Heroku master. Let's see what happens here. This may take a minute. Especially today, my system's been slow. So, okay. So this is what I was afraid of. It's asking me to sign in again. So we'll say Heroku login. So click login. Oh my gosh, why is everything so slow today? So when we go git push Heroku master, let's see if it asks me for anything else. There it is. So I'm getting this credential manager. So I need to put in my credentials here. So what we're going to do, if you get this, what we need is a password or a token. So I'm going to attempt to acquire a token here. So I'm going to say Heroku auth token. Okay, so I'm going to use this token here. And now let's go ahead and try that again. And so I have to put in my credentials here, and that should do it. Okay, so now it's pushing, and this should take a minute. Okay, so it looks like it successfully pushed everything, and you can see here in this line, it will give you a URL where your application is deployed to. So we can go ahead and copy this and then open browser, check, and there it is. All right, we're deployed. And again, if we check the dashboard, we can click on that app and we can see the logs for the builds and deployments. And you can open your app here by clicking this button. It'll open that same URL. Okay. All right, guys, that does it. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, thank you. And if it was helpful, please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.